A highly valuable piggy bank with even more valuable contents has been stolen, he announced. And as far as I'm concerned, the impish thief was careless enough to leave his fingerprints at a crime scene. I see, and would you look at this? Here we have our first two suspects. He gave us a stern look and turned his head towards the kitchen. I have a strong sense that another one might be sitting in the kitchen. Louise and I were barely able to contain our giggles. That's how silly Kai's demeanor was. Somehow we still managed two at least halfway serious nods. Well, Mr. Super Detective said. I will have to take both of your fingerprints, and if neither of them match the prints at a crime scene, we'll have all the evidence we need to prove that our suspect in the kitchen was the perpetrator. That sounded fairly logical, and Louisa and my urge to giggle diminished somewhat. But how? Do you even want to take the fingerprints? I asked. We already used up all the dust from the pencil sharpener. Said Kai, and pretended to have a very hard think. We could obviously make an effort and sharpen another pencil until we have a new pin of dust, though I'm thinking there's another, easier way around the problem. He looked me straight in the eye. Your father has an office, doesn't he? Sure, I said. We're standing inside a parsonage. You couldn't fathom the amount of paperwork my dad has to do. Neither can I, by the way, I added, because I suddenly had a very strange thought. Because I don't think the Bible ever mentioned Jesus ever needing even a single scrap of paper. Maybe he was simply more attentive and had better memory than your old dad, Louisa made a daring proposition. Maybe, still. Jesus sure didn't need an office, and it would have been a little weird if he told that one paralyzed guy to come back later and visit him at his office at 9 o'clock in the morning if he really wanted to be healed, I said, only to be met with my friends' slightly confused and questioning faces. Clearly, we didn't share the same theological background knowledge. Then I remembered the original query and answered with a counter-question. And what exactly do you need an office for? Well, Kai put on another one of his holier-than-thou-looking faces. As you might be aware, any office usually contains at least a bunch of stamps and a seal, and to use those, one usually requires an ink pad. And an ink pad is just what we need to get our fingerprints onto a sheet of paper. Oh nice, I'm sure Dad's got one of those somewhere in his office, I cheered, because I'd already seen his method of taking fingerprints in a child-friendly crime thriller on TV. Quickly, we jumped off my bed and ran down the stairs even quicker. Chapter 12, in which we start looking for an ink pad and learn a lot of interesting things along the way. What are you kids up to this time? Janine asked suspiciously, when she noticed us scurrying past the kitchen door. We want to search my dad's office for an ink pad to take our fingerprints with, I tried to tell her the simple and unembellished truth, for once. All right, said Janine. I was content with my experiment. Maybe saying the truth from time to time wasn't all that bad. Or maybe Janine hadn't even listened to what I was saying, and had given us an okay based on goodwill assumption. Maybe she also had a sixth sense for hearing if someone was lying or not, which would have been activated if I had said, we just want to go outside, or we're just playing something. Or she would have probably been at least more suspicious, and then she would have asked for further details in some FBI-adjacent interrogation, and we would have added up with a strict set of rules that allowed us to use the ink pad, but forbid us from getting ink on our hands. A paradox, as you see, and about as logical as a parent telling you that yes, you are allowed to wear sandals to play in a sandbook, but God forbid even a single grain of sand touches your bare feet. Once on the ground floor, we had to cross a larger office to reach my dad's smaller personal office. As far as I knew, the larger office had always been just cold and empty, and I'd barely ever seen my dad use it as a place to talk to someone. He once told me that he only used the room to take phone calls in, if only to prevent himself from making a mess of it, and consecutively having to clean up said mess. Next to the telephone was a small notebook, not something more traditional like a box of sticky notes. My dad had once told me that there was no point writing down important information from phone calls on individual pieces of paper, because there was a near 100% chance of him losing them sooner rather than later. If he made his phone call notes in a little book, on the other hand, he could still find them again, even months after the original conversation. Simple sticky notes didn't allow for such organization. I wasn't entirely sure whether this was just another one of my father's many tics, or if his system was actually useful. I wouldn't know. I received significantly less phone calls than my dad, and wouldn't remember taking notes for even one. Though, really, maybe there was a reason we wrote our reminders for our homeworks into an homework book, instead of a loose stack of papers. Maybe even for the first time in his life, my dad had had a sensible idea. A row of glass-paneled shelves along the wall contained hundreds of books that likely hadn't been touched, not to speak of read by anyone, in just as many years. Other shelves likely contained age-old stinking files that not a single soul would ever think to miss if they disappeared. The furniture seemed ancient and looked like it had been in frequent use. My dad had told me that he'd found them in stacks of bulky waste and decided to save them from the worst fate of being disposed. I wasn't sure I agreed, because at least they would have been outside, instead of being permanently deposited into an unused office space. The farthest corner revealed an accurate double door that led to the archive and further down my father's personal office. Kai and Louise rushed to the doors head first, while I followed more slowly, for some reason closing the door behind me. "So, now where does your dad keep his ink pads?" Kai asked. We certainly didn't see one just laying about. In fact, even after a first cursory look around, the room seemed unusually clean. Some of the drawers were labeled as private envelopes, bills, info material. I reached out to open one of them in blind hope and was met with the chaos that I'd expected in the first place. Pens, tape, a stapler, staple pins, and so on, all thrown into a single drawer.